Hello. Good day everyone. It's a great day to study psychology, right? Don't you agree? Anyway, our topic for today, ang title natin, What is the Psyche? I think this is the most important question that all psych majors must know how to answer. Nakakahiya naman kasi pag may nagtanong sa'yo, o anong course mo sa college? Psychology. Ano ba pinag-aaralan nyo dyan? E di yung psyche. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng psyche sa psychology? Right? Dapat alam nyo yung sagot doon sa tanong na yon. Now, let me give you a simple exercise to illustrate my point. Imagine you are in a party and somebody discovers that you are a psych major and then asks you a question. Uy, di ba psych major ka? Ano ba yung inaaral mo dyan? Ano bang ibig sabihin kapag nag-aaral ka ng psychology? So, I'm going to give you 10 seconds, 10 to 15 seconds to try answering this question. Ready? Go. Diba? Kahit sagutin mo lang sa isip mo, somebody ask you, ano bang pinag-aaralan sa psychology? O anong bang ibig sabihin ng psychology? What would you answer? Now, honestly, in my many years of teaching psychology, I saw a lot of psych majors answer this question the wrong way. And that is so sad, that is so unfortunate. Malamang o madalas, if you are most students, the way you answer this question is you give the topics of what you study in psychology. Wait lang kailangan ko ng aking pen dito. Ayan. So as I was saying, kapag tinatanong ang isang psych major, ano ba yung psychology? Ano ba yung inaaral dyan? Most students will give the topics rather than or instead of the essence of psychology. If you are one of those many students, going back to that question, ano bang inaaral nyo sa psychology? Malamang sa malamang, ang isasagot mo are the topics about psychology. O in psychology, we study memory. In psychology, we study personality. O in psychology, we study the brain. Now, totoo naman yon. We study those things in psychology, but those are the topics in psychology. Those answers are not the essence of psychology. When a person asks you, what does it involve when you study psychology, or what do you exactly study in psychology, they are after the essence. Ano ba yung pinaka-punto o ano yung pinaka-pinag-aaralan nyo in the field of psychology? So, wag kang magbigay ng sagot dyan na nagbibigay ka ng mga topics na nakalagay sa syllabus. So, that's the kind of the skill I want to develop in you in this lecture. How do you answer this kind of question? Now, for us to really understand what psychology is all about, we need to go back to the root word of psychology. Alam naman natin na ang psikolohiya ay isang field of knowledge. It is a study of something. Kaya nga meron tayong suffix na OGY or logy, the study of something. What is that something that we study in this field? Yung tinatawag nating psyche. Right? And in textbooks, anong ibig sabihin ng psychology? The scientific study of human behavior and mental processes. In almost all textbooks, siguro iba-iba lang ng phrasing, but basically, this is what textbooks in psychology will teach you. Psychology is the scientific study of human behavior and mental processes. But I really want you to understand this field deeper, more than just the textbook definition. So what we're going to do in the next slides is we are going to go beyond this textbook definition of psychology by talking about tracing back the origin of the word psyche. Alam nyo ba yung salitang psyche, it's equivalent to the following words: the mind, soul, and the spirit. So kung pag-aaralan mo yung etymology ng salitang psyche, you will sense, you will see na yung psyche kahalintulad, kalebel ng mga sumusunod na salita: mind, soul, and spirit, which all refer to the non-physical aspect of the person. That's very important. That's why I put an asterisk right here. So the first thing that you need to know about your field is our field is focusing on the non-physical aspect of human beings. Nakapokus tayo sa elemento ng pagkatao na hindi nakikita, non-physical. That's what they have in common, no? Psyche, the mind, soul, and the spirit. That's why, dito pa lang, I want you to correct the common misconception about psychology that we specialize in the brain. Because the word brain is a very physical word. Pag sinabi mong brain, ito yung nasa loob ng iyong ulo. Ito yung nasa loob ng skull mo, consisting of trillions of tissues. Is that clear? So psychology, the essence of psychology is not the brain. Although we study about the brain, that's why you have physiological psychology as a subject, or in some schools, biological psychology, but this is not the essence of psychology. Sino ang nag-i-specialize sa brain? Yan yung mga neurologist. Neurology yan eh. And neurology is a medical field, no? Neurology. Yan. 'Di ba? It is a medical field, and as we know in medical field, ang focus talaga niyan is the physical. That's the essence of medical fields. We focus on the physical. But psychology, just in case hindi mo pa alam, it's not a medical subject. Okay? So, correct this misconception. The brain is not the same as the mind. The brain is for neurologists. That's in the field of medicine. In psychology, we talk about the mind, the non-physical aspect of the person called the mind. The brain is not the same as the mind. Yung brain, yun yung nahahawakan mo. Yun yung dumudugo. Yan yung tinutubuan ng tumor. Yung mind, that's the non-physical aspect of the brain. That's the force, the energy that makes the brain work. Okay? So, dyan pa lang, meron na kayo natutunan about what psychology is about. Again, we focus on the non-physical aspect of the person. But let's dig deeper. Let's go into the history of psychology to further understand what the field is all about. We need to go back to philosophy. Alam nyo bakit? Because psychology used to be a subfield under philosophy. Again, just in case you still don't know, yung psikolohiya nanggaling yan sa philosophy. So if there was no philosophy, there will be no psychology. In fact, there was a time in the history of psychology where the term psychology is not existent. People who study about the mind are not called psychologists, they are called philosophers. Because we were just under philosophy. We are just a subspecialization under philosophy. But again, as you will learn in the program, in the history of psychology, there was a time that we were able to separate ourselves from the field of philosophy, and we had a new identity different from philosophy. Kaya nagkaroon tayo ng sarili nating pangalan na psychology. But we used to be under philosophy. But let's go back to the time where we were under philosophy. During those times, sa kainitan ng philosophy, there was a very popular movement among philosophers called dualism. What is dualism? This is an area of study in philosophy where they are saying that human nature is dual in nature. From the term itself, dualism, ibig sabihin dalawa. Isa itong framework, isa itong pananaw tungkol sa tao na sinasabi, we have two dimensions in our existence. We have the physical dimension and the non-physical dimension. Sounds familiar? We have our body dimension and we have our mind dimension. The body and mind connection. They are two different elements of our existence, but they affect one another. The body affects the mind affects the body. Anong tawag doon? We call that dualism. So when we talk about a person, a human being, that human being consists of two dimensions, the physical and the non-physical. At alam nyo, yung pananaw na yan sa philosophy, it's not exclusive in philosophy. This framework is validated by the scriptures, by the Holy Scriptures. For example, in the book of Ecclesiastes, we can see dualism in this statement. Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return to God who gave it. Notice the distinction between the dust and the spirit. So meron tayong dust dimension, which is our body, pero meron din tayong spiritual dimension, which is the non-physical aspect of our existence. In another passage, fast forward in the New Testament, these are the words of Jesus himself, the great psychologist. He said, "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul." Again, notice the distinction between the physical and the non-physical. So the biblical model of a person agrees with the philosophical model of dualism. Okay? So again, going back to the definition or to the origin of the word psyche, that non-physical aspect, yung tinatawag na soul dito in the Bible, okay? Yan yung pinag-aaralan natin sa psychology. This is the heart, the essence of being a psychologist. We are studying that non-physical aspect of the person. In fact, even the first so-called fathers of psychology, William James, Wilhelm Wundt, Sigmund Freud, mga kinukonsider nating mga founders ng field natin yan, when you read their books about how they understand what they're studying in psychology, you can sense that they are referring to the non-physical aspect of the person. Take for instance, basahin natin yung sinabi ni William James, "The greatest revolution of our generation is the discovery that human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspect of their lives." So William James here is talking about inner attitudes. He talks about minds. He talks about changing that inner attitude. How about Wilhelm Wundt? Anong sinasabi niya about our psyche? The distinguishing characteristics of mind are a subjective sort. We know them only from the contents of our own consciousness. So those words, subjective, consciousness, these are non-physical aspect of our psyche or of our existence. How about Sigmund Freud? Sikat na sikat si Sigmund Freud, one of the founding fathers of psychology. Unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. So when we talk about psychology, we talk about the non-physical, which includes unexpressed emotions. And if you recognize the name Sigmund Freud, another term that Freud was very popular of, the unconscious or the subconscious. All of these things that I'm saying, all of these ideas, these psychologists are talking about are all under the non-physical aspect of the person. Yan ang pinag-aaralan natin in our field. So when somebody asks you, ano bang pinag-aaralan nyo sa psychology? Anong tamang sagot? Yun ang tamang sagot. We are focusing on the non-physical aspect of the person. Alright? Questions? Now, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is the summary of what I'm talking about so far. What is psychology? We focus on the psyche, the study of the psyche, where we focus our attention on the non-physical aspect of human beings and we focus on the non-physical processes that human beings are capable of. Tulad ng love, tulad ng thinking, tulad ng decision making, tulad ng self-esteem, increasing self-confidence, how to have good interpersonal relationships. All of those things we talk about in psychology. Okay? So, before I move on, I'm going to give you a quick break. Pag-isipan nyo muna yung mga sinabi ko so far about the field of psychology. The next question I want to ask to deepen your understanding of our field, ano yung origin ng psyche? O sa simpleng Tagalog, saan ba nanggaling yung psyche? Where did it come from? We can trace the origin of the psyche from the book of Genesis chapter 2 verse 7. It says, "Then the Lord God formed man of dust from the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being." So I want to pause a little bit, and then I want you to reread again this passage from Genesis. Basahin niyo ulit. If we are going to put this idea, this passage in a simple diagram, ang sinasabi ng passage, ganito ang nangyari, kaya tayo nagkaroon ng psyche. God gave us breath of life, according to the passage, and that breath of life made us into a living being. Now, the term breath of life here is very important in the book of Genesis. Yung breath of life na yan. Bakit mahalaga yan? Alam nyo ba, trivia, that the original term for the breath of life used in the book of Genesis from the Hebrew word, alam nyo kung ano? Ano pala yung equivalent niyan sa Hebrew translation? It's equivalent to the word spiritus. Spiritus. Okay? So, yung spiritus, anong ibig sabihin ng spiritus? Kasi medyo maliit to, no? Maliit. Pinalaki ko na lang dito. Spiritus means a breathing, breath of God, breath of life, character. Can you imagine that? Yun pala yung original word dito ng breath of life. Ang ibig sabihin pala ng breath of life dito is spiritus, which is in line with how the Bible is describing this breath of life. A breath, breath of God, breath of life, or character. Eh ano ngayon? So we can now substitute the word spirit from the words breath of life. Okay? So he breathed into his nostrils spirit, and man became a living being. That's very important. Merong pumasok na spirit sa atin, and when that spirit entered the body, which is the dust from the ground, we became a living being. Now, I want to emphasize on the word spirit. Again, this is very important. So yung nauna, nakalagay dito, breath of life, which is equivalent to the word spirit or spiritus. Based on the etymology, dito kayo bibilib. Alam nyo ba that when you study again the origin of the word spirit or spiritus, this is where the word psyche that we use in psychology came from. So you read again the Greek translation of spirit, psyche. In English, this is equivalent to the following words: breath, spirit, and soul. And this psyche later on became, this is where we derive the name psychologia or psychology. So yung psyche pala dito sa salitang psychology, basically it means spirit. So to summarize the etymology analysis that we are using here, no? Ganyan ang nangyari. Nagsimula pala yan sa word na spiritus, just like what I've shown you a while ago, and later that spiritus became the psyche, and that psyche was used for naming our field, psychology. Oh, ano ngayon ng implication yan? Ang laki ng implication yan. So, in essence, what do you mean by psychology? This is the scientific study of the spirit. Right? Kung titignan mo yung proper usage of the term, psychology is the scientific study of the soul or of the spirit, the non-physical aspect of the person. So ano pinag-aaralan mo sa psychology? Ang simpleng sagot dyan, spirito. Nag-aaral tayo ng spirito ng tao. Nag-aaral tayo ng kaluluwa ng tao. So palitan nyo na yung misconception nyo na ang kaluluwa o ang spirito, nag-aaral lang yan mga albularyo or mga fortune tellers or mga mediums. No. If we are going to follow the correct usage of the term psyche in psychology, that's what we do. Iba lang tayo sa mga albularyo because we use the scientific method in trying to understand that spirit. But, yung focus natin walang pinagkaiba sa mga albularyo. Walang pinagkaiba sa mga spiritual mediums. We focus on the spirit of the person. Oh. Kaya dapat ganyan ang pananaw nyo sa field ng psychology. This is a field where we talk about spiritual or psychological things. Now, let's go back to that passage that we were talking about. So that breath of life or the spirit that entered our body, that led the way para maging living being tayo. Remember, before the spirit, if you go back to this passage, there was no life. Tama ba ako doon? There was no life. Dust pa lang yun. Ang tawag dyan, corpse or bangkay. Katawan lang na hindi pa buhay. Kailan na buhay yung katawan na yon? When that spirit or when that psyche entered the body. According to the passage, when the spirit entered the body, what happened? That became a living being. So the implication of this, if you can read on the slide, the psyche is what makes us alive. Our psyche defines our existence. So kung tatanungin ka, bakit ka buhay? Paano mo nasabing buhay ka? Anong sagot? Kasi meron akong psyche sa loob ng aking katawan. Meron akong kaluluwa sa loob ng aking katawan. That's the correct answer to that question. Alright? That's very important. Now, let's go back to the slide, no? Now, I want to focus more on the words living being. Diba? Kasi yun yung implication natin, no? Nung nagkaroon tayo ng psyche, doon pala naging buhay yung katawan na ginawa ng Diyos. Now, what do you mean by living being? What happened to that body that God created when a spirit entered that body? Anong ibig sabihin kapag sinabi mong naging living being yung katawan na yon? It simply means that now that we have a psyche inside our body, we are now capable of psychological processes. Kasi meron na tayong psyche eh. The psyche is now inside the body which made us alive, which means we are now capable to undergo different psychological processes, and these psychological processes are the things that we study scientifically in the field of psychology. What are those psychological processes? We have thinking, feeling, and wanting. So all of those words that you can read here, judging, perceiving, clarifying, determining, all the feelings here, you're stressed, you're calm, you're worried, you're excited. Under wanting, goals, desire, your ability to identify your purpose, your ability to choose values, all of these things are called what? Spiritual or psychological processes. And these are, again, paulit-ulit ako, the processes that we study in the field of psychology. And take note, all of these processes are non-physical, which is again the focus of psychology. Kaya kung babalikan natin yung mga words ng mga founding fathers of psychology, if you remember, they were talking about psychological processes. When they refer to psychology, again, baka nakalimutan nyo na, si William James, he talked about the process of changing attitudes. Pinag-aaralan yan in psychology, paano palitan yung attitude mo. Si Wilhelm Wundt, he was talking about the contents of our consciousness. Paano ba malalaman ano laman ng consciousness mo? And of course, let's not forget Sigmund Freud, he mentioned something about unexpressed emotions. According to Freud, those unexpressed emotions continually affect our everyday behavior. So in the language of Sigmund Freud, if you want to understand yourself better, you have to make those unconscious emotions conscious. And that in itself is a psychological process. Nagigets nyo? That's what it means when you are studying psychology. That's what it means when you say you are a student of psychology. You dedicate your mind in understanding these things that I am talking about. Alright? Basta ang tatandaan nyo lang is, if there is one piece of message that I want you to learn so far in our discussion is our psyche is a created or a designed element. Our psyche is a created or a designed element. May pinanggalingan yung psyche natin. It was created. Don't think that our psyche is just a biological product. Because believe it or not, there are psychologists out there who will tell you that everything you experience psychologically is just the activity of trillions of cells. Ang tawag nila dyan, mga materialistic psychologists. Where everything, all psychological experiences that we have, kaya daw yung ipaliwanag ng mga physical factors. So when you fall in love, when you dream, all your motivations are just physiological things. Hormones lang yan. That's inaccurate. Given the correct definition of psychology. We talk about non-physical processes. We talk about an element that was designed or created by a creator. That spirit, that psyche, entering the physical body. Now, please don't be confused with the differences of the following terms, no? Kasi marami mga students na ko-confuse dyan, spirit, soul, mind, or psyche. What are the differences? Again, they refer to one thing, the non-physical aspect of the person. Nag-iiba-iba lang yan kung saang field mo sila ginagamit. Usually, some fields use a certain term from this, while other fields use other terms. For instance, the words spirit or soul are being often used in the context of theology or during the church era. Kapag nagre-refer tayo sa non-physical aspect of the person, even in the Bible, the words spirit and soul are used a lot. And then later on, fast forward, the words mind and the psyche are being used in the field of philosophy. Actually, in philosophy, mas ginagamit yung mind. And later on, when psychology separated from philosophy, we stopped using the word mind. Now, we are using the word psyche. Although paminsan-minsan, even in scientific psychology today, no, we still use the word mind. But the word mind is very philosophical. A more scientific term for the mind would be the psyche. And by the way, mag-sidetrack lang ako ng konti, no? Bakit ba tayo nag-separate from philosophy? What enabled us to have our own identity different from philosophy? What's the answer? The scientific method. This is what makes us different from philosophers. When philosophers try to answer things about the human mind, they don't use the scientific method. They use introspection. This is a different procedure or method in coming up with answers about the mind. Pero tayo mga psychologists, hindi tayo nag-i-introspection, gumagamit tayo ng scientific method. So that's another thing that you have to remember about your field. Although you are studying something that is non-physical, you study it using the scientific method. Therefore, psychology is considered a science. Dapat alam mo yan. Ang psikolohiya ay isang siyensya. If you check the definition of psychology in the website of the American Psychological Association, the largest organization in psychology, you will sense that the way APA sees psychology is, it is a scientific field. Basahin nyo na lang to silently on your own. Psychology is a scientific field. Okay? So yan yung pinagkaiba natin sa mga philosophers. Okay? So think about first the things that I've taught you so far about psychology para lang makapag-reflect kayo ng mabilis. I'll be back. Alright, I hope so far you are now learning a lot of things about the field that you are studying. Sa lahat ng sinabi ko about what psychology is, there are a lot of implications that will be present as a psych major. If you accept all those things that I've told you about what psychology is, it must affect some of your basic beliefs about human beings and about life in general. It's very hard to separate psychology from life because psychology is life. Right? Yan yung maganda sa field natin eh. Kaya in our field, whenever we talk about a topic, there are always direct applications in our everyday life because we are talking about life itself. Remember Genesis? It is that psyche that made that dust alive. So psychology is life. So ano tong mga implications na mangyayari sa atin kapag tinanggap natin yung truth that psyche refers to the non-physical aspect of the person. It will affect some of your basic beliefs like what? Number 1, or letter A, if you are a psych major, one implication of this is you need to be a believer of the spirit. Remember what is psychology? You talk about the psyche, which is the spirit or the soul. So kapag sinabi mong psychologist ka or you are a psych major and you study the spirit, dapat lang naniniwala ka sa spirit. Kasi yan yung araw-araw mong pinag-aaralan eh. For the next 3 to 4 years, yan ang pag-aaralan mo. How the spirit works. How the spirit functions. Can you imagine if you don't believe in the spirit yet you call yourself a psych major or a psychologist? Para kang barbero na sinasabi mo sa kliyente mo na hindi ka naniniwala sa buhok. That's so sad. That's so weird. Right? Barbero ka, you deal with hairs, therefore you need to believe that hairs are real. Imagine mo, hirap na hirap kang gumupit. Diba? Kasi sa tingin mo, yung mga ginugupit mo, guni-guni mo lang. It won't work. So for those of you who don't believe in spiritual things, you don't even believe in the spirit, yet you are studying psychology, ask yourself, are you in the right course? Or ask yourself, if you're not a believer of the spirit, ask yourself, does it make sense to believe in a spirit? Given that you are a psych major. Given this is what we study in psychology. Remember, we are not our brain. Don't believe the framework that our psychological experiences are explained by physiological processes. Oh, lahat yan, hormones lang yan. Lahat yan, nagdikit-dikit na cells lang yan sa ulo mo, kaya ka nakaka-experience ng hope, kaya ka naka-experience ng happiness, nagkataon lang na yung mga neurotransmitters mo matataas. That is a very shallow way of understanding what we are talking about in this field. We are not our brain. Are there any evidences to support this claim to believe in the spirit? Actually, meron. Okay, marami ng mga scientific studies na nagpapakita that it makes sense to believe in the existence of the psyche or the spirit. Take for instance the studies being done about placebo effects. I'm sure narinig niyo na yung ibig sabihin ng placebo effect, no? Ibig sabihin ng placebo effect is this one. A fake treatment can make someone better simply because they expect it to help. Usually, placebo effect studies are being done in the field of medicine. Usually, ang ginagawa dyan para makita natin yung placebo effect, we divide people into 2 groups. One group, both groups are ill for a certain disease, and then we give them 2 different treatments. The treatment group will be given a drug that really treats the disease. Ito talaga yung gamot na magpapagaling doon sa sakit ng treatment group. While the placebo group, again, they are still sick. They are also sick just like the first group, but they will be given a placebo drug. Ibig sabihin ng placebo drug, wala talaga siyang epekto. It is just usually sugar or water na may sugar, but you make these people believe that it's the real thing. Na ito talaga yung gamot sa sakit nila. and then you let them take the placebo drug in. And in placebo effects, anong nakikita nila? Simply by believing that the drugs work makes it possible for the disease to be healed. So, nakikita nila na yung placebo drug becomes just as effective as the real drug. Yung pekeng gamot, dahil naniniwala silang nakakagamot talaga yun, nagiging kasing bisa na rin ng tunay na gamot. That's what you mean by placebo effect. Let me read to you an excerpt coming from a placebo study. No? Ang ganda nung pagkakasabi dito. In medical trials, researchers began to find that for some reason, the control groups would report some effect. Or the placebo group, I mean. Placebo group dapat to, no? The placebo group would report some effect, that their symptoms had alleviated or that their pain had faded away even though they had actually had no treatment. Peke yung gamot na kinuha nila, pero dahil naniwala silang it will work, it really works in the laboratory. Over the course of decades of research, a vast array of different conditions have been shown to benefit from placebos. Ano yung mga kayang gamutin ng placebo? Acne, Crohn's disease, epilepsy, erectile dysfunction, ulcers, multiple sclerosis, osteoarthritis, rheumatism, and colitis. Oh my goodness, mga bigating mga sakit ito na kayang gamutin sa pamamagitan ng placebo effect. And if you can get my line of thinking, placebo effects are the result of our psyche believing something will happen. It's not a physical thing. It's a mental thing. Placebo effect happens because our spirit believes at something. These kinds of studies confirm that our psyche or our spirit, the non-physical aspect of our existence, is not equal to the brain. Kahit silipin mo pa sa MRI yung brain, hindi mo makikita yung specific part of the brain that lights up, that explains placebo effect. It's not in the brain. There is something within the brain or around the brain we don't know that makes these things happen. Kaya alam nyo, nung nabasa ko tong study na to, I cannot help it but to connect this to some passages in the Bible. Is this the biblical psychology of faith? Is this how we should look at faith? Kaya ba sinabi ni Jesus in one of the passages in the Bible, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. Oh my goodness. Can't you see this as placebo effect? Can't you see this as the capability of our psyche, of our spirit? When our spirit sincerely believes at something, what happens? Miracles happen. Like what Jesus is saying here. Telling the mountain to move and it will move. Or to put that in a diagram, it's something like this. You use your faith, which is a psychological resource. What happens? It enables you to transcend your physical limitations. Now, overcome mo yung physical limitations mo. Now, overcome mo yung sakit ng katawan. Because your psyche takes over your physiological processes. And my favorite illustration here to justify or to give support to this point, what happened to Peter? Remember that time? Bumabagyo, natatakot yung mga disciples na baka malunod sila until they saw Jesus walking on the water. And they were scared, but Jesus asked them not to be scared until Peter dared him, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come there with you. And Jesus did do that. Come here, he said to Peter. And what happened? Peter, because he had faith, he believed that's his master, that's Jesus. Yung spirito niya naniwala, yung psyche niya naniwala. Bumaba siya ng bangka and he began walking on the water. Right? He didn't drown. He was able to walk on the water just like how Jesus was doing it. Again, You put that in a diagram, it looks something like this. Peter used his psychological resource, which is faith, and that enabled him to transcend his physical limitation. But as you all know, in the story, this did not last. Peter saw the wind very strong and the waves are so tall that he began to be scared. He lost his focus. He lost his faith. And what happened when he lost his faith? He began sinking under the water. And that was the time when Christ approached him and helped him up. And Jesus, being the master psychologist, explained to Peter what happened. Nung niligtas niya si Pedro sa pagkakalunod, pinaliwanag niya kay Peter anong nangyari, psychologically speaking. Anong sinabi ni Jesus? You of little faith, why did you doubt? That was Jesus' explanation. Kaya ka lumubog because you doubted. You put that in a diagram, it looks something like this. Pinababa mo kasi yung faith mo, nawala yung spiritual resource na ginagamit mo, and because of that, you returned to the limitations of the physical world. Which again shows to us that the physical world is very different from the psychological world. The body is different from the spirit. Another example of placebo effect in connection to a spiritual resource is found in the book of Luke, chapter 8, verses 47 to 48. You remember the story by the bleeding woman? Ang tagal-tagal na niyang sakit yan, no? Dinudugo siya ng marami. Hindi klaro kung ano yung diagnosis ng sakit niya, pero nung narinig niya that Jesus is coming to town, she began planning. How can I hold even just a piece of his garment? Because if I'm able to hold just a piece of his garment, I will be healed. And to make the long story short, she found a way, nakalusot siya sa crowd, and she was successful in holding a piece of Jesus' garment. And what happened? She was healed. Let's read that part. Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. Kasi huminto si Jesus dito eh. Diba? After the woman touched the piece of Jesus' garment, Jesus felt power flowed from him. And he asked the crowd, who among you here touched me? Somebody touched me. Doon na umamin yung babae sa verse 47. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. And look at what Jesus said in verse 48. Then he said to her, Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. Her psyche, through Jesus, healed her. Because she believed that she will be healed simply by touching a garment, a piece of garment of Jesus. That psychological resource of faith healed her. Her mind was able to transcend the physical illness that she is feeling. Sir, wala ba kayo mga modern day example? Kasi yung mga example nyo biblical, no? Panahon pa po ni Kopong-Kopong yan. Meron akong modern example dito, and this is just very recently. What happened to Heidelin Diaz? Alam nyo ba, trivia, yung weight na binuhat pala niya nung nanalo siya ng gold medal, according to her interviews, no? This is the first time that she was able to lift that amount of weight. During her practices before she won the gold medal, every time she lifts this kinds of weight, this amount of weight, she's not successful. Hindi niya nakakaya for some reason. Kaya inis na inis siya. And nagkataon na yun yung kailangan niyang buhatin to win the gold medal. But that's the problem. That's the weight that she cannot lift during her practices. But what happened? She tries anyway with faith. So what happens? She lifted that weight and she won the gold medal. Diba? Sabi nga ni Heidelin herself, no, basahin niyo dyan sa slide, natatry ko naman siya in training, pero hindi ko nagagawa. Every time na itatry ko yung weight na yon, hindi ko nagagawa, nakaka-frustrate, umiiyak ako. Hindi ko in-expect na mabubuhat ko yon kahapon, siguro si God yun. And when you read these words by Heidelin, ewan ko lang sa inyo, no? Pero talagang hindi ko maiwasan na i-connect sa Matthew 17:20 that this strength that Heidelin has right here, it's no longer a physical strength, but we can say it's a spiritual strength. It is a psychological strength. She was able to lift this not because she's physically strong, but because she is using effectively a psychological resource, which is called faith. She had faith. Again, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you will say, move. You will say to this mountain, move, and it will move. And nothing will be impossible to you. Seems impossible for Heidelin. But because she had faith, because she was able to use that spiritual resource, that psychological resource of faith, she was able to transcend her physical limitations. That's why, going back to the direct quotation that I'm reading from the book Spiritual Science, it appears that even now, most scientists don't grasp the full implications of placebo effect, that the human mind has the capacity to powerfully influence almost any aspect of our physiology, including the healing of many conditions, binasa ko na kanina yan, and the alleviation of a large range of symptoms. And in turn, what conclusion can we learn from this? This implies that the mind is actually primary to the physical stuff of our bodies and brains, rather than a byproduct of brain activity. I hope that's clear. We are not defined by the physical processes that we have. Our physical processes is controlled by a higher psyche that we are. Alright? Another implication of this is, in a way, if you call yourself a psych major, other than your belief in spirits, in a way, you need to believe in the concept of God. Alam ko, marami ngayon nakataas ang mga kilay, but hear me out before you do, before you react. Kung sinasabi mong psychologist ka at naniniwala ka sa spirit, it follows na dapat pinaniniwalaan mo rin saan nanggaling yung spirit. Because definitely, spirit is not a product of physical world. Ang mga atoms and molecules, hindi nila kaya gumawa ng spirit. Siguro kaya nila gumawa ng ulan, kaya nilang gumawa ng lupa, pero physical stuff leading to a non-physical stuff is impossible. So the origin of the spirit that we are studying in psychology is none other than the creator called God. Remember, God is spirit. And He created spirits like Him. That's what it means when He says in Genesis 1:26 that we are created in His own image. What does that mean? When God said He created us in His own image, it means we have certain psychological qualities that we share with Him. Meron tayo mga overlaps na attribute with God. Again, I'm not saying we are exactly like God, because God is so far away from us in connection to these attributes, but we have a little piece of those attributes that God has. And one of the basic attributes that we share with God is we are spiritual beings, just like God is. John 1:21, God is spirit. John 4:21, God is spirit. You see? It follows. And the third implication is, if you are a believer of the spirit, if you believe in what you are studying in psychology in a way, you also need to believe in the afterlife. Naniniwala kang may spirito. Naniniwala ka na ang origin ng spirito ay ginawa yan ng Diyos. May designer yan. Hindi yan sumabog lang at naging spirit na. The third belief that follows, dapat mong pinaniniwalaan, you need to believe in the afterlife. Alam nyo bakit? Because one basic fact about the spirit in connection to the body is the spirit outlives the body. Ang spirito, buhay pa rin yan kahit mamatay yung katawan mo. Again, we remember Ecclesiastes, then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit or the psyche shall return to God who gave it. So kung naniniwala ka sa psyche at naniniwala ka dito, in a way, naniniwala ka dapat sa afterlife. Totoo ba talagang may afterlife? Again, scientifically, slowly, it is now being shown, it makes scientific sense to believe in the afterlife. Let me read to you some excerpts coming from the book Spiritual Science by Steve Taylor. By the way, nalimutan kong sabihin sa inyo, yung mga binabasa kong excerpts kanina, di ba marami akong mga binasang excerpts kanina on placebo effect? I also got it from this book ha. So every excerpt that I have read in this lesson came from Spiritual Science by Steve Taylor. Okay? In this book, he compiles different scientific studies that support the existence of the spirit and the idea that there is life after death. Okay? So let me read to you or let me just show to you some evidences na sinasabi dito sa spiritual science which prove na talagang merong life after death. Yung psyche natin buhay pa rin even after our body dies. For instance, how do you explain near-death experiences? Did you know that this topic, near-death experiences or out-of-the-body experiences, these are all legitimate studies in the field of science. Marami na mga laboratories all over the world focusing their efforts in studying these things, and their data is showing that it makes a lot of sense to believe in these things. Kasi kahit yung mga, again, hardcore scientists in their different laboratories are now confirming the idea or the data that support that there is life after death, that something in us still survives independent of our body. Wala lang tayong enough time to discuss all these things, but if you want to read these studies, you can just download this article from Google Scholar for free. And some of these articles are also mentioned in the book that I have read to you a while ago, yung Spiritual Science. Ayan, no? Yung mga studies na yan, hindi yan pwedeng mapeke. Kasi grabe ang standards ng mga yan para ma-publish ng ganyan yan. And if you want more ideas about evidences of life after death, I highly recommend you watch this documentary from Netflix. I think it's still there, Surviving Death. This is a documentary, I think less than 10 episodes, but all these episodes will show to you that it makes a lot of scientific sense. There are data that we have to support the idea that there is life after death. Our psyche survives our body. So again, just to close this discussion, ang sinasabi ko lang dito, if you really understand what we study in psychology, the heart and soul of what it means to be a psychologist, which is to study and understand the soul of the person, it makes sense to believe in these three ideas. The idea of the spirit, the idea of a God who created the spirit, and the idea that spirit outlives our body, there is afterlife. So that's my question to you as a psych major, because you want to major in this field. Do you believe in these ideas? You think about this. To end our class, let me just share with you some valuable lessons that you should have learned today about our discussion on what is the psyche. Number 1, psychology studies the psyche, the non-physical aspect of the person. Ngayon, alam mo na yung isasagot mo. If somebody asks you, di ba psych major ka? Sabihin mo nga sa akin, ano bang pinag-aaralan nyo sa field na yan? What does it mean to be a psych major? What does it mean to be a psychologist? Alam nyo na yung isasagot nyo. Number 2, we study or we should study the psyche using the scientific method. Again, the area of study that we share with some mediums, fortune tellers, or albularyo are the same. We talk about the soul, the spirit, the spiritual world, but what makes us different from them and from philosophy is we use the scientific method. Diba? So wag rin naman tayong puro Bible verse lang in trying to justify what we know in psychology. Kailangan yung mga ginagamit nating yung mga basis ng paniniwala natin in the field of psychology is coming from the scientific method. And that's the challenge in our field. I hope you understand. Because basically, scientific method is a method invented for the physical sciences. Galing yan sa medicine, galing yan sa geology, galing yan sa botany. The physical sciences use the scientific method. Ginaya lang ng mga psychologists yan eh. Kasi sa kagustuhan nating makonsider na science, we try to use a method meant for the physical world to study something non-physical. And that's fine. Although it's hard, it's possible. Alright? So that's another thing that you have to learn about your field, no? That we have very high respect for the method of science. We use data, hard evidences to back up everything we say about the psyche of the person. Next, number 3, God, spirit, afterlife are the foundation ideas of psychology. Ang hirap hindi maniwala. It's hard not to believe in these things and you call yourself as a psych major or a psychology professional. That's why I want you to make this as a response. You use these ideas as anchors to how you see the psyche. Ganyan dapat yung pananaw natin sa psyche. We always go back to those 3 basic ideas. In that way, that will enable you to have a more accurate understanding of what's happening in a person's psychological life, especially the word spirit. Kailangan talaga maniwala ka sa spirit, maniwala ka sa spiritual world because remember, psyche means spirit. It's the scientific study of the spirit. It's so hard to do psychology if you don't believe that spirits exist. It's so hard to study psychology if you believe that everything is just physiological processes. My suggestion, if you believe that everything is physical, you shift to medicine, not psychology. Maybe you can study psychiatry, but not psychology. Because the basic assumption here is we believe in the existence of a spiritual element within human beings. And also for those of you who still don't believe in the spirit, yet you're a psych major, meron akong favor na gusto kong hingin sa inyo, huwag mong tawagin sarili mong psych major. Right? If you believe that there's no spirit, there's no such thing as the psyche, then give the field another name. Any suggestions? Ano kayang pwedeng itawag natin sa psychology? Get rid of the word psyche. Come up with another word that you can attach to the word ology that refers to the field that I'm talking about. Any suggestion? Diba? So kung hindi ka naniniwala sa spirit, edi huwag mong tawagin sarili mong psychology or psych major kasi yun yung pinag-aaralan natin in the first place. And as I close this lecture, let me just clarify one thing about our lesson today. Baka marami ditong na-offend, no? Or marami akong nasagasaang mga beliefs. But I would rather tell you the truth. Right? I mean, you pay your tuition fee to know the truth, not opinion, not biases, right? And this is the truth. That when we talk about psychology, we focus on the spirit of the person. But one clarification I want to give you is not all teachers in psychology, not all psychology professionals believe in the spirit. Not all. Kaming mga teachers, iba-iba kami ng mga beliefs dyan. I know some teachers, they don't believe in the concept of the spirit. They have other models of the human psyche. It's just that you are under my care in this subject, so this is what I'm teaching. But don't expect that all teachers in your program will believe in this version of the human mind. Iba-iba kami ng framework. And in case you encountered a framework of the mind which you think suits you bagay sa'yo, parang mas comfortable ka sa ganong framework, you are free to believe that. Hindi ko naman to pinipilit sa inyo. Right? I am just presenting to you the truth. Sana maniwala kayo because it's the truth. That's what we believe. That's what we do with truth. We accept, we believe it, we apply it. And this is the truth. But in case you found quote-unquote other truths out there about the psyche and you think that suits you better than this one, then by all means accept that. But my conscience is clear. I have presented to you the truth about our field, about what we're doing here. Alright? So if you have any questions, please just type it in and I'm going to answer those questions with all clarity. Alright? So I hope marami kayong natutunan sa lesson natin ngayon. It's been a good topic to talk about, lalong-lalo na sa mga students like you wanting to study psychology. Alright? Thank you for listening, everyone. And then, I'll see you.